just as a memory test for all of you learning people, I believe I said I was the luckiest person. Well, now I am. I get to introduce you to my friend, Josh Bersin. And I don't think he needs any kind of real introduction to any of you. Does anybody not know who Josh is? Because he's, sort of a god in our world. I do have a real formal bio, but I'm just going to say it's an honor, Josh.
Thank you, Becky. Okay, I know these are really hard chairs. I don't know about you guys, but somebody should put some pads on those. So I have a little, I think what I'm gonna do, you've already heard about EdCast and how the technology works and what's going on, and I have a lot of stuff on that I'll go on briefly. But I really think what I'd like to talk about more is this paradigm of learning in the flow of work. And I'm really excited that everybody was saying it today because I dreamed it up about a month or two ago and just started using it because it seemed like it fit everything that was going on. Because I got into learning around the same time as Linda from lynda.com. I got into the space around 2000, completely by accident. And at that point in time, the paradigm was e-learning, which was instructor-led learning in a window. And then there was blended learning, which was instructor-led learning in a window with some other stuff added. And then there was kind of nothing for a while. And then YouTube and all these other technologies took off, and we didn't pay much attention to it in learning. And then all of a sudden, we realized our LMSs weren't really what we needed anymore, and now we're catching up. And so what I really want to talk about is this concept, and I wouldn't say I'm there yet on it, but I'm learning about it, and I want to hear stories and examples from you guys about how it's working for you, because I think this is where this is all going, and it's a way to think about products like EdCast and implement them in a way that they don't turn into the next LMS. The one thing I'm a little worried about, and Carl is the greatest guy, and I've had the greatest time getting to know Carl and work with him and with EdCast, but let's make sure that EdCast doesn't turn into another LMS 5 years from now, and what can we do to prevent that? And I think Carl's going to do that on the technology side, but we have to do it on the user side. I won't go through this stuff. I'll go through this pretty fast. A couple of slides that I use on sort of why the market is so hot. People really know that they need to learn. There's no question about it. Individuals know it. Most of the data on employee engagement says that when people leave a company, it's usually because they're not learning. It's not because they're not making enough money, although that's oftentimes the reason too. Everybody's worried about their jobs and their job models. I'm on the advisory board of a company that does career management, and I was with them yesterday, and I kept explaining to them, it isn't really career management anymore. It's figuring out what a career even looks like, and what is it going to be a year from now when all the jobs that we have today don't even make any sense anymore. And robots and AI and cognitive is part of that. That's sort of the Deloitte thing behind it. But I don't personally think robotics and AI are anything new. For those of you that are my age, we've been through a couple of these technology evolutions before, and we just have to do it faster. And so we have to give people tools to find the next job faster. And the other interesting thing, and this is an economics chart, but I'll just give you a second to think about it, a higher and higher percentage of stock market capitalization every year is based on intangible assets. Intangible assets means it's intellectual property, it's patents, it's brand, it's software, it's services. It's not physical or financial capital. So your company's ability to learn is your product. It is what your company does, period. It's not just an HR thing to make the L&D department a little bit better operating. So if your CEO or CFO doesn't understand why you need to buy this kind of technology and do this, I'll be happy to explain it to them. There's lots of good reasons. It's much bigger than making the learning department better and dealing with the LMS. Now this is why I talk about learning in the flow of work, is I look at this data a lot. In the last year or two, I've turned into an armchair economist because I try to figure out why we have these issues in the workforce. And one of the issues we have is productivity. We are working harder, we are working more hours. I have 2 kids in their 20s that work for software companies. You guys, I'm sure, are the same way. Becky and I have talked about it. I get messages from Carl in the middle of the night. We're all dealing with this never-ending, relentless, always-on kind of work experience. and it's affected the economy. Funny thing about the economy is even though the stock market's going up and the unemployment rate is going down, and people are taking credit for all these wonderful economic activities, people actually are not happy about their work experience right now. They are not making enough money. We just did a study at Deloitte that showed that 60% of millennials and Gen Z, younger people, are now doing side hustle work to make more money so that they can afford their mortgage or their student loan debt or whatever it is that they're dealing with in their personal lives. And I've got all sorts of interesting data on sort of the lack of financial literacy in the US workforce that is under the covers of all this economic growth. So what are we gonna do about that? And a lot of the reason is this, is that we have all these wonderful tools, but we have too many of them. And I'm not against any of these tools. I mean, they're all great, but I talk to companies that have Slack that tell me it's driving them crazy, and I talk to companies that have email that tell me it's driving them crazy. And it's not the technology's fault. The technology vendors are building things that people buy and they use them. We and HR and in L&D have to make sense of this. And so I've been now spending a year or two with Deloitte trying to figure out who owns productivity in the company. That's a good question. I don't think most companies actually know the answer to that. Does IT own it? Kind of not. Does the line manager own it? Of course they do, but do they know all the tools and techniques and approaches to creating better productive workforce? A lot of times they don't know that. So I think one of the big redefinitions of HR and L&D is doing things that we know how to do in a way that directly increase productivity. And productivity isn't an economic term. It might be sales per employee. It might be number of customer service calls. All the things you guys think about as learning and development professionals, I think this is falling in our lap. So anyway, you guys have seen a lot of this. I will skip sort of this getting back to the comments from Danone, how do I pronounce that? Being a company that's only 35 years old is actually a liability because the workforce is getting older. So I just wanted to make a comment about that. One of the trends that I think is important to think about as we think about learning is not only do we want to reskill or upskill all the young people that are moving through their jobs very, very quickly and advancing very fast, but we also have to reskill a lot of the people in their 50s and 60s who aren't going to retire, don't want to retire. And I found from the research in the human capital trends last year that we actually have a real problem in most companies of generational bias against older people. So I'll just throw that out there if any of you are interested in thinking about that. You can apply your learning. You might find that the most avid users of your new EdCast learning system is actually the people that are a little bit older who are dying to reinvent themselves because they know about learning. They've been doing it their whole lives. And they've seen these generations come and go. That's sort of where I am in my career. Okay, so that's why I brought it up. And the other thing about products like EdCast and one of the reasons the LMS is dying is because the paradigm of the LMS was a hierarchy. It was a career model that moved up a hierarchy. It was a job model that moved up a hierarchy. The way all the LMS, I know all these LMS vendors, I've worked with them for years. All the business rules they put together, the reporting they put together, they're based on a hierarchical industrial business model, which most of your companies are trying to move away from. Being digital as a business doesn't mean doing digital, stuff, tools. It means operating in a digital way. So companies like Schneider Electric or GE or HP or Danone or any of you, the more you talk about being digital, what you end up talking about is moving faster, putting people into new projects, operating as a team, multifunctional groups working together without having to go through the burdens of going through all the functional leadership to get that done, putting together new measurement systems for that. And if you do that, and I just went through 6 years of this at Deloitte, if you work that way in your company, what you find is learning is the most important thing anybody does. Because you're always getting involved in some new project with new people on some new initiative that you're not completely sure you've ever done before. So this type of a learning platform, whatever we call EdCast, obviously LXP, the digital learning platform, is essential to you making this transformation. The LMS is not going to get you there. So as much as I like Cornerstone and all of those companies, they design systems for the last management paradigm that we're all trying to get beyond. And that's why this idea of learning on the flow of work is so important. And the other evidence of that is what's going on in careers. The LinkedIn guys are great. I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn published some research last week that said that 23 or 24% of Americans, and this is, the LinkedIn database is huge, are career sleepwalking. Did you see that article? They don't like their jobs and they don't know what to do. So they're sleepwalking in their jobs. That's 1 in 4 people. Now, some of those people are probably in cities or towns or companies where they don't have a lot of opportunities, but I think a lot of them do, and they don't know where to go, and they don't know how to look for the next job. Maybe they don't have a mentor or a coach, or their organization doesn't support them. You can solve that problem with products like this in ways we could never do before. Okay. So anyway, this is a picture. I'll just put it up here for 1 minute. This is a chart I did many, many years ago, and I keep refreshing it because it helps me understand why these big changes are happening. There's these paradigms that we've been through in learning. And like I said, we went through this paradigm of, oops, is there a pointer? No, there really isn't, I guess. Is there a pointer on this thing? There was. Oh, well, it's probably burned out. So, we went through this one. We went through, by the way, do you all have talent management systems? Are you excited about those? Same thing happened, right? We built those in the early 2000s when we thought integrated talent management was the solution to the war for talent. And it was a good idea at the time, but now that we have these integrated HCM tools like Workday and SuccessFactors, we don't need a separate talent management system anymore. So that kind of fell behind too. So this new stuff that's coming is really important to understand, because when you're debating what to buy and who to do business with and what the IT department should be spending time on, these are the paradigms that will get you ready for what's coming next. L&D itself, I won't spend a lot of time on this chart because this is about a year old, but we did this study last year and we found that most people were fed up with their L&D departments. Now, I think this is actually not true anymore. I think most companies now do have tools, or they're getting tools like EdCast, and they are providing solutions that were never before possible. And people aren't complaining about the LMS so much because now you guys are doing prototypes with better technology. But it really was bad for a while. I mean, I stopped doing research on L&D. I don't know if you noticed, I didn't do any research on L&D for about 2 years because it was just boring. There was nothing to write about. There just wasn't anything interesting going on. And we just did research on other things. Now it's really hot. And I would say I'm probably spending at least half my time on learning right now because there are so many technologies and so many ways to apply AI and better design to learning that people really, really can use. So it's a really, really exciting time. So what do I mean by learning in the flow of work? And now that I see more people using the phrase, it gives me maybe an inspiration to do a lot more writing on this and talking about it. The first is accept the fact, now I know one of you guys had a chart with 3 or 4 types of learning, but accept the fact that there is micro learning and there's macro learning, and neither is better or worse than the other. And there are times when you need macro learning, and I'll show you an example of what that is. And there are times when you want micro learning. And I don't know what the definition of micro learning is today, and I know Grovo tried to trademark it, but it's small amounts of learning, things that you can do quickly, things that you can do as needed, things that are more topical or more relevant to a performance support, as opposed to formal, longer form learning. Longer form learning is not going away. I think it is still vitally needed. It will always be needed in all sorts of examples. Here's one of the ways to think about where this all fits. Now, this is a theoretical chart. There's no data behind it, but I think most of you will understand it. In every single job you've ever had in your life, and every time you've changed jobs, you've gone through a curve like this, where for the first 3, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, you were going through a very steep learning curve. You were constantly feeling like you had to ask somebody a lot of questions. You were maybe not doing things very well. You weren't feeling productive. And then you reached a point where you kind of got it. and you kind of plateaued, and you said, I've got this under control, and then a year later you were bored with the job, and you said, I'm not learning anything, I'm slipping down this curve, and what can I do to get it to go back up again? And if your company was a well-run company or you had a good manager, you didn't go too low, because if you go too far down this curve, you end up quitting or leaving the company. And we got a new assignment, I got a new project, I got some development, and I moved back up, or something bad happened, and I went off the deep edge and I just quit. And that's just normal the way that human beings are. It turns out that I think one of the simplest ways to think about all this stuff you have is to just intersperse it into this type of a model in your workforce, in your sales organization, product, whatever it is. There's going to be some formal macro learning activities where when somebody's new to this job, we want you to go through this onboarding program because there's some things that we know are going to really make your life miserable if you don't know them in the first couple of months. But after that, we're going to give you a lot more things to do on your own, and maybe we'll make them easy to find and directly, targeted. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just leave it open to you and you get it from your boss or your team and let the software and the AI recommend it for you. And then you'll have another spate or bout of macro learning later. One of the reasons that I think these, whatever we want to call them, macro learning or transitional programs are so important is that if we really do move into a world where people are changing careers more quickly, they're going to want help getting into this new role. So I really think the two go together, and one doesn't replace the other, and one isn't better than the other. And at some point, people are going to want credit for what they did. Now I know there's tools in EdCasts for getting credibility points and being on the leaderboard and so forth. And I think that's actually really important that you do that. And I think at some point in your journey down the EdCast road, you probably need to think about credentials. How do we give people formal credit or formal recognition for what they've done and what they've learned and how they've shared? And I think some of that can be done with the platforms, and some of that's just great culture and having a great culture of rewarding people for sharing what they know and sharing and learning others. Now, another way to think about this is something that I sort of discovered after I was talking to another vendor, is the real word flow. The word flow in sort of the psychological world is this state of being, the state of mindfulness you enter when you're doing work that you're really good at. Well, you know what that's like when you're just, and it happens at different times of the day based on your, body rhythm and so forth. How do you stay in flow at work? Wouldn't it be great if we could be in flow all the time? Well, when you start a new job, you're kind of out of flow, and you go way over flow because you don't know what's going on, and you're kind of really excited, but there's a lot of anxiety. And then you get some experience in the job, and you go back into flow, and then you get bored, and you go back out of flow, and then you come back you get some new assignment, a new activity, and you're back in the flow, and then you get promoted, and then you're out of the flow again. And I'm not saying there's no numbers behind this, but this is another way to tag and categorize and design your content so that your line managers and your designers can think about why you're putting all this range of stuff into the system. One of the things I discovered in the Bersin business when we built our research library over the years, and it was like, I've been doing this for 18 years now. So we didn't really think about where somebody was on this flow when we were building all of our research. And a lot of you guys have read our research. We used to write these big books, and we would write these little things, and then we'd write one of these, and we had all these different types of research. And I never really thought about the fact that, we need beginner research, we need intermediate research, we need advanced research, we need research for people that are so advanced they want to write the research. And so I think what's going to happen as you implement EdCast is you're going to see the research naturally fall into different categories, and then you'll be able to more intelligently curate it based on these kinds of models. Now, one of the things I want to share with you is some research that OReilly did. OReilly is a really cool company that a lot of you probably don't know about, that's a book company that's now getting into learning, technical learning. And they don't have as much learning as LinkedIn or a lot of the, Skillsoft and existing vendors, but they have really, really incredible amounts of technical documentation. So they tend to sell Safari Online to IT departments and software development groups. And so they have a lot of data on why software engineers go to look up things in books versus take courses. And they've done studies of that. And what they found is it's actually really simple. And it's so obvious, I think it's something that will just, it's something you probably already know, is that when you're new to a topic, and they found, by the way, and all of the research they did on this, that about 58% of the consumption was structured, 42% was unstructured. So it was almost 50-50, but it was a little more towards the structured than the unstructured. And what they found is that if you think about somebody going through a four-level capability model, as a software engineer, you can kind of imagine what these levels would be. I don't even know what C++ is. I kind of know what it is, but I haven't used it very much. I've been writing code for a couple of years, and I'm so good at this, everybody asks me to help them write their code. What they found is it's like a perfect pyramid. That in the beginning, people want really structured boot camp type activities where they're spoon-fed through content until they get a level of confidence that they can use it. And then later, they don't want that. They just want to know, I've already done this, I need to find a snippet of code, or somebody else has done this, I need to talk to somebody who's done it and see what they can teach me. And I think this is just, somewhat obvious, but it's really important to think about in the model. And the way they characterize it is, they pretty much said, look, if you're new to the role, you're going to get formal stuff. If you're not new to the role, you're going to get the informal stuff. And they've been, trying to figure out how to build a platform that's good at doing that. I don't think they've done that yet. They basically have, a learning system like everybody else's. But that's a little bit of help on that. Carl mentioned the forgetting curve. You guys know this. If you don't know this, you should look it up. I think the original research came from Purdue, where they studied the teaching of anatomy, and they found that no matter how much you cram people in anatomy courses, within about 2 days they forget half of it. And so they did studies, and they found that one of the ways to prevent people from forgetting things is to make them practice it. And so an interesting, fairly obvious to most L&D professionals, but something to remind yourself of when you're doing digital learning, is that nobody really learns anything until they use it. I mean, I wrote a couple of books on learning and talked to a lot of you guys for many years. I can read. I happen to be a very good reader. I learn by reading. It's just the way I was, wired. Some people want to talk about it. Some people want to try it. Some people want to, have a debate. But you really don't know it until you've used it, because that's when you remember it. And what they found in this anatomy training at Purdue was that repeated study helped. Repetition helped. Giving people better conceptual maps on why these different things are true, so they understood the concept, helped. But actually practicing it helped the most. 146% higher retention. So if you've got something going on in your company where there's a lot of consumption of learning in a particular area, think about what you can do to help people practice it. Now, let me give you an example of a way to do that in a digital learning platform, and this could be a feature that Carl could easily build into EdCast. He can't buy this because there's two companies that are doing this. There's a company called Practice that was acquired by Instructure, and there's another company called Rehearsal that's doing the same thing. But I actually don't think this would be very hard for a company like EdCast to build. It's basically a little tool where employees, you have a learning activity of some kind, and you give employees a little rubric on the things we want you to know about this topic. And you say to them, put together a 5-minute video on what you've learned and do a scenario, share it with your team, and then we'll send it to each other and we'll rate each other's videos. And do you guys do that? Do you have a tool that does that? Great, so you already have this feature. It's really useful. I mean, I've now talked to sales organizations that did this. Dell is doing this. I mean, I ran into a whole bunch of companies using this particular tool from Instructure, but I guess you can get this from EdCast. That's another part of learning in the flow that we didn't have in the LMS. I mean, the LMS has never been anything like that. They gave you a big test or something at the end. All right. Let's see, I know it's late. I won't spend a lot of time on a lot of this stuff. This is more about, this is funny. Danny Johnson, when she was working for us 2 years ago, we were working on the new version of the maturity model. What these maturity models are, by the way, for those of you that haven't seen them, is it's something we figured out how to do where we would do these giant surveys in all of these different areas of HR, and then we'd get all this data back, and we'd use some statistical techniques to try to cluster companies into groups and say, well, companies that are doing this tend to be doing this, and companies doing this tend to be doing this, and then we would break the groups into 4 levels, beginners, intermediates, advanced, and super advanced. And so we did that whole process for a year in L&D. About 12, 15 months ago, developed a maturity model, and look at what level 4 was. It was called Flow, and that was a year and a half ago, and we published this, and no one read it, no one understood it. I went out and pitched it, and everybody was like, what are you talking about? Nobody had any idea what we were talking about, but now I think it makes sense. What the ultimate goal of an L&D department is to make learning so relevant that it's just there when you need it. And it is job relevant, role relevant, transition relevant, career relevant, and that's what this learning in the flow of work is all about. And so what my point was showing you this chart is that this isn't the first time we've thought about it. In fact, when I got into e-learning in 2001, the company that I worked for at the time, in 2001, we didn't even have the word e-learning yet. I don't know if you remember that. It wasn't actually coined until around 2002 or something. We called it learning on demand because we didn't know what to call it. And that's kind of what this is now. It's 18 years later, we're kind of there. So how do we get there? We've got standards now. We've got XAPI. I mean, one of the other reasons that the LMS doesn't feel so comfortable anymore is that it was built around SCORM, right? LMS, the core LMS technology is tracking pages and chapters through a course. In a digital learning environment, you don't really want to track that. You want to track activity level, engagement level, patterns of usage, dwell time. You just want different data, and we can get that with the new standards and the new tools that we couldn't get before. People are telling us in these different surveys that they're looking for help in curation, they're looking for help in personalization. I mean, it was funny, the story, one of you guys talked about how hard it is to do curation. Go over to Facebook and ask them how hard it is to do curation. I think they have 10,000 people or more trying to do curation in their environment and having a devil of a time doing it. I think it is hard, and I was talking to some EdCast folks earlier today. EdCast is as advanced as anyone in trying to figure out how to apply AI to this. And one of the things that's cool about what EdCast is doing is by working with these global skilling initiatives in India and other countries, they're getting huge amounts of data on the patterns of usage, as does LinkedIn. And so this is a problem of figuring out what to do with all that data, and it's going to get smarter all the time, but it's not going to be perfect. So we're going to be doing that. And the other tools are very important too, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but one of the other technologies in learning that I think is really going to be transformational is the use of virtual reality. If you haven't played around with these VR tools, it isn't really relevant to this particular presentation, but they are really, really coming along fast. And there's a category of learning problems where you have a high risk, high cost, simulation type experience where you just can't do it very often, that you now can do virtually. And I've now talked to some vendors doing that have really, really done some great things there. You guys saw some of the charts on the roles of L&D. I think most of you are dealing with this, and I hear this all the time from L&D people. I mean, I don't think instructional design is going away, but I think instructional designers just have to be open-minded and apply their expertise in this paradigm. And don't force the old paradigm. You can use the instructional design concepts in the new paradigm, and that's why I think there's probably going to be a reinvention of instructional design going on, and somebody's probably writing books on this right now, on how do we do instructional design in a world where we have thousands of on-demand learning objects and all this data. I think that's going to be really fun. As far as the learning architecture, there is no center of the learning platform anymore. I mean, Carl would probably argue that it's EdCast. Maybe it is. Maybe it will be because the learning experience platform is going to be the user experience. Let me make one comment about the Netflix thing. I think Carl was the first person who coined that paradigm, and then Adam Miller picked it up at Cornerstone, and a bunch of people started talking about it. And I wrote an article about this, and I don't know if any of you read it, but one of the things I said is, learning is not entertainment. Netflix, YouTube, Facebook are deliberately engaging and addictive platforms because they sell advertising and entertainment, right? We're not trying to do that. We're not trying to get people addicted to our learning system. We're trying to get them to learn what they need to learn as fast as they possibly can and go back to work. So I don't want to push that paradigm too hard. I think it's a great paradigm to get us started, but if we find our employees spending a lot of time in EdCast clicking around, we got to make sure that that's actually useful and that they're getting value out of it. I mean, you can assume they're getting value out of it if they're putting time into it, because people do, sort of decide on their own where they can spend their time. But I think we have to continue to think about how do we make sure that we're getting people the information they need fast enough that they can leave EdCast and go back to what they were doing before. And that's why, I'm trying to build out this idea of what does learning in the flow of work mean in different situations. So any one of you out there, any one of you guys that are working on a problem in this area, in a particular domain, I would love to talk to you, because I think we've got to share examples of how this works in different real-world situations. People are buying more tools. There never will be one. I don't need to convince you guys of that. It's okay to have 4, 5, 6, 7 learning tools. You don't have to feel guilty about that. Everybody else does it. It's just the way it works. The other flawed strategy in the LMS market was the LMS vendors did try to do everything. I remember when Saba bought Centra and tried to do virtual classroom, and then there was this belief that if we got it all into one system, the customers would be happy. But it never seems to go that way, because the innovation happens too fast, and the bigger you are as a vendor, the harder you have time building the next great thing. So I would not feel uncomfortable about having 4 or 5 different tools. You're going to need a learning architect. You're going to need someone like Kevin or whoever it is in your company that sort of knows how these pieces fit together and works on getting the data integrated. Unfortunately, that's just the way L&D works. There are a lot of pilots going on. Pilots are good, experiments are good. We used to think you didn't want to do an experiment because you would burn yourself and you would ruin your career. Now it's actually a good thing to do. So it's okay to try new tools. These virtual reality tools are an example of that. This is the story that about Walmart. I think most of you guys, if you work in industrial corporations, big companies with lots of heavy-duty lifting training, you should try this. I was in India at a conference with a bunch of utilities, and one of the guys who runs learning for one of the biggest electric utilities in India said, oh yeah, we have a whole virtual reality system to teach people how to operate our power plants over there. And they don't usually spend money on this stuff. They really don't have the budgets for these kinds of things. So this is another area of innovation I think is important. Okay. And then the stuff that Carl was talking about earlier is how do we integrate this into the experiences and the systems of productivity? And let me just stop, maybe I'll sort of end up with this, that I think one of the things that EdCast understands probably better than Microsoft, to tell you the truth, although I know you were just at Microsoft, but, and I think you guys at LinkedIn, you need to get your friends in Seattle to get with this, because I've been up there and I don't think they totally understand this yet. Ideally, we should be learning in the systems we're using. We should be learning in Outlook, in Exchange, in Slack, in whatever, Facebook, and there should be tips to help us. And I know you guys have some little tools in EdCast to monitor your activity and then recommend content. I think that is probably where this is going to end up going. Now, if the EdCast environment is exciting and sexy enough for your company that people do spend a lot of time there, that's a big step forward. But 2 or 3 years from now, I think we have to make these integrations work better. And I think, you know, the companies that are doing that are succeeding. Salesforce, for example, who nobody would expect them to be an L&D company, is actually now at the point where they have built a learning platform for Salesforce customers that is as good as anybody's third-party LMS, and they're probably going to end up building something that looks like EdCast, or maybe they'll partner with Carl, because they're seeing this in their customer base of the millions of people that are sitting in front of Salesforce all day, trying to figure out how to use it, open an account, change an opportunity, whatever it is they're trying to do in there. I was with the CHRO of, I think it was one of the Pepsi bottlers in Europe, and she said, you know, we were trying to figure out what learning system to buy, and we looked at all the LMSs, and we looked at all the content, and we realized that the biggest environment that our employees live in is Salesforce. That's really, they spend most of their time there. So she said, so we didn't buy any of that stuff. We went into the Salesforce environment and we built all sorts of little tips and tools that pop up. I don't know how they built them. They obviously use some in development tool in Salesforce, and they instrumented the Salesforce tool, which has all these APIs, so that they would get a lot of it developed. And she said it was a huge success. Everybody is taking all sorts of training and learning all sorts of things in there that we could never get them to do in the LMS or any other system that we ever had. And I think EdCast totally understands this. This is a new world that hasn't been solved yet, but I think a year from now we're going to look back on it and we're going to say, you know what, we actually are delivering learning in the flow of work. We are seeing relevant content appear when people need it, and we're able to organize it and structure it in a way that helps people through their developmental journeys. Okay, that's it. I just, I hope that was helpful. I know you guys have been sitting here a long time. But thank you, Carl, for support and inviting me down to come talk to you. And I'm only as good as my conversations with all of you. I mean, I'm really more of a pattern matcher than an inventor. I learn from talking to all of you. So if you have stories or questions or things you want to talk about, please just let me know, and I'd love to, share what I'm learning with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Great, thank you, Josh.